Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are able to hear my voice and also see my screen clearly. Today's webinar, we're going to look at how interest rates and earnings affect the operation of companies. What I'd like to say here is I'll define precisely what interest rates are. Let me first of all share my screen. Give me a moment. really sorry. It's possible you may not be hearing, you may not have been hearing my voice, so sorry about that. So what I'm saying is this, what I was saying from the start is this, that if the interest rate is very high, if we have a very high interest rate, then there is less appetite for taking the loan, because that would mean that we are less interested in picking the loans. It means that if you're given a loan of $1, you have to pay at least 14% of that loan. And if you're given a loan of 7%, then you have to pay 7% of that loan. So the more the interest rate, the less expansion, the less those companies that rely on the loans to expand, the less they'll be expanding. And if the interest rate is very small, like you're seeing here, if it's 7%, then the more they'll take the loan and the more they'll be expanding. So if the interest rate is even lower, that is, maybe it is 5%, the more likely the companies are going to take the loans. So high loans, easy accessibility of loans means more growth. The more difficult it is to access loans, the less there's going to be more growth. So like like I was saying here, assuming Zoom decides to take a loan right now, and then the current interest rate in the market is 14%, and the person doing the evaluation for them says, okay, previously it was 7%, it was as low as 5%. If this growth is not necessary, they're likely not to take this loan here. If the growth which they're having here, the growth which they will have by the 14%, if it's not very necessary, then they're likely not going to pick this loan unless it's necessary, because this is very expensive. Imagine it's like double, almost 3 times the interest rate they were charging when it was summer here. So the more the interest rate increases, the less likely companies will have money. So if you hear, for example, companies which depend strictly on borrowing to expand, if you hear that there is high interest rate, or the Feds announce that the interest rates are going to be very high, there's less chances that those companies are going to expand, and their share price is going to either decline slightly or they're going to remain around the same price. And on the other side, if we have a very low interest rate, that is, if the interest rate is 5%, that encourages borrowing, and in the long run encourages expansion, which would mean that the price of that share or that company share will increase drastically. So this is what causes growth. The interest rate don't apply to any company. It applies to companies that rely on loans to grow. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Does it make sense what I'm saying? That interest rates depend on the growth of that company. But if it's a company which does not rely on loans strictly, which it's almost impossible to find a company which operates that loans, the companies that rely on loans for growth, those are the companies that are affected. So if you know that they're going to take a loan, or they're applying for a loan, there's a loan rejection or something like that, then you know very well that their share price is going to be affected. So this another aspect which I talked about, which is earnings. Earnings, this is how much revenue which comes into a company as a result of the day-to-day operations. So if maybe they take it as gross earnings, that's everything exclusive of them, and the interest rates are very high, then the appetite for taking loans become very low. So it means that the less they likely rely on the loans to expand, they'll still just expand themselves with the earnings which they have. But if, for example, if they rely on the loans to expand themselves, so there is like a close correlation between interest rates and earnings of a company. The more the earnings of a company, the higher the interest rate, the less the appetite for loans. The more the earnings, the less the interest rate, the more the appetite for the loans. So if you are earning more, you don't rely so much on the loan, because the earnings will cover you for the places where the loan should cover you. That is why I'm saying, if we are looking at your charts right now, don't just trade anything just because the Fed have increased the interest rate, or the interest rate have been decreased, or the earnings of a company has decreased or increased. understand that there are companies which rely on loans to expand. That's the first thing. Understand that we do have companies which rely strictly on loans to increase their earnings. So those companies which rely on loans, whether there's high interest rates or there's less interest rates, they'll still likely pick loans. If there is a less interest rate, then they'll highly take even more loans to encourage the expansion. And if a company has more earnings, if the company has if they have a lot of earnings, then that alone decreases their appetite for the loans, because loans are expensive in the long. They're not expensive as such, because you look at the most successful companies, each one of them must at least always have a loan somewhere, not a must, but always they have a loan somewhere. Facebook has loans, Google has loans, Microsoft has loans. Almost all of them, they have some loan somewhere. Gearing, that's known as gearing. Gearing is very, very important. It encourages responsible expansion. It brings the sense of responsibility. That's why the loans are very important. When you pick the loan, you see the sense of becoming more responsible. That's you, because there's an obligation to be made at the end of the day. But if your earnings are enough, you may still take the loans just to expand yourself and to encourage you to expand even more. So the same thing applies to companies. If a company wants to expand, but they want to keep whatever they have, to keep saving at the same time, and only to increase based on whatever they borrowed, then they'll go for the loan. Higher loan interest rate means less appetite, and on the other side means less expansion. Lower interest rate means high appetite for loans and encourages expansion. Higher earnings means less appetite for loans and could result to high expansion. Low earnings could result into high demand for loans and could also result to high expansion. So that's what I had to say for today. I hope you've grabbed something on what I've said now. That is entirely how interest rates correlates with the earnings of a company. That should be the end of this analysis of today's webinar. We'll meet again next week at the same time. Thank you and see you.